Given that it's been a little over 30 years since Quentin Tarantino made his directorial debut, he is still somewhat of an outsider in terms of Hollywood style and how he chooses his projects. He's an auteur in the best sense of the word. While his influences and homages are obvious, his career path as a director is not so obvious itself. He has no formal training or film school education. Instead, Tarantino grew up on a diet of classic films and television during a golden age of cinema. TV movies of the 1970s and earlier are all alluded to in his film renderings. Specific genres such as blaxploitation, kung fu movies, westerns and noir are all felt as influences in his own films. As Tarantino's 10th and reportedly final film now languishes in limbo, having been scrapped for the time being, let's take a look back at his career and try to divine and appreciate his contribution to modern cinema. On a side note though, it could be a likely scenario that Tarantino returns and continues making films. Just take a look at Steven Spielberg at 77 and Martin Scorsese at 81, who both have major projects in development. It is still not 100% clear whether we have seen the final curtain on Tarantino's career as writer-director. He may have a change of heart and go ahead and make that final film, just as he had a change of heart and circled back to complete The Hateful Eight after vowing to abandon the production. In the meantime though, let's take a look back on a storied career and 10 actual movies that have contributed so much to popular culture. Tarantino likes to start films by throwing us into the middle of the action. This is often referred to in literary terms as in media res. For example, in Reservoir Dogs, we find ourselves right in the middle of an escape from a heist, and the film deals mainly with the fallout and conveys the exposition in the form of flashbacks. Tarantino then tends to begin with a dramatic situation that is currently unfolding and likes to tell the story around that, bringing order from chaos. He likes to extrapolate the characters from the incident. Remember, it is an old adage that characters are not who they are, but characters are actually what they do. This is important in screenwriting, as if a character and their actions do not propel the narrative forward, they should not actually be physically present on the page. Tarantino's writing is very taut in this regard. He can spend an average of 9 months writing and honing a screenplay, almost as much time as producing the final film itself. In Pulp Fiction, for example, we meet a variety of different characters. Their stories are not told in a linear format by any means, but rather as strands of the larger overarching narrative. The main thread of the story is set in a diner with a situation involving robbers who have had the tables literally turned on them. Tarantino then proceeds to lay out the different stories, evolve the various characters, and unfold the narrative over the course of one day, bookended by the diner scene, with each story interwoven. Similarly, in Kill Bill, the inciting incident has already happened. The bride has been all but murdered and left for dead by the people she regarded as family. The narrative is then laid out once again in chapter form. This is clearly presented in the form of information cards, which appear before each scene, or each chapter. We see this in Kill Bill, in The Hateful Eight, in Inglourious Basterds. So even though Tarantino's storytelling format is non-linear, he goes to great lengths to orientate the audience and enable us to follow the narrative. Tarantino uses a number of signature devices to convey a narrative through dialogue. These include a two-way conversation between characters, a soliloquy of the character talking to the camera, or a narration. One example of narration would be the bride character, or Kiddo, in Kill Bill. Uma Thurman's character narrates the details, but also sporadically repeats these details to the camera in dramatic scenes. A good example of a soliloquy would be Marcellus Wallace's speech to Butch Coolidge's character in Pulp Fiction, or Tim Roth's positive affirmations in Reservoir Dogs. As for two-way dialogue, there are numerous scenes, some of the most famous and iconic of which are between Samuel L. Jackson's Jules and John Travolta's Vincent in Pulp Fiction, as well as various scenes between the characters in Reservoir Dogs. In the latter example, both characters are very well opposed to each other and so are perfectly placed to generate good dialogue. If you listen to them, they disagree about almost everything, and vehemently so. Again, this type of conflict is fertile ground for a compelling and entertaining dialogue. With regard to writing dialogue, Tarantino likes to imagine the characters sitting down and speaking to each other, and then begins to allow the characters themselves to extrapolate what they would likely say, given their circumstances and motivations. When writing, he likes to develop the characters up until the inciting incident, and flesh out the story as far as the midpoint. From then on, he argues, the story takes on a life of its own, and the characters actually speak to him and dictate how the film will go and the script will resolve. In other words, character development is extremely important in constructing the dialogue in various scenes. By the midpoint of the screenplay, the characters themselves will have a distinctive voice that will influence cause and effect. In Pulp Fiction, Samuel L. Jackson's character has a sort of epiphany when carrying out a hit. It is his character's main turning point in the film. He decides, in the spirit of that moment, to fervently give up his life of crime and violence and to walk a more righteous path. Of course, his colleague Vincent is incredulous, and their paths, both in life and discursively speaking, diverge from that point onward. This has consequences for both of them. Subsequently, the non-linear plot reveals why Jules isn't there when Vincent runs into Butch for a second time. Conversely, we don't necessarily get to know why Aldo Rain has a rope burn around his neck in Inglourious Basterds. Neither do we know what shines from the briefcase in Pulp Fiction. And Tarantino is okay with that. Some things are inferred and left to the audience to fill in. They are not plot holes as such, just little niches in the fabric of the narrative that belong to the audience. Just as the screenwriter hands over ownership to the director, so too Tarantino hands over ownership to the audience, at least to some extent. The famous fine artist Pablo Picasso once said, "Good artists copy, great artists steal." Tarantino is a self-confessed connoisseur and collector of vignettes from various genres and tropes, reappropriating them and paying homage to them in his movies. He steals little ideas and motifs from genres that were highly influential on him when he grew up. Notable examples would be blaxploitation and various Asian martial arts movies. One striking example of this that plays through the narrative of Tarantino's first feature, Reservoir Dogs, right through Pulp Fiction and into his third feature, Jackie Brown, is the character of an African-American police detective heroine portrayed so many times in the 1970s by actress Pam Grier. Her character is specifically referenced in Reservoir Dogs, and this reference point evolves into a narrative device, as Grier actually stars as the titular character of Jackie Brown. Even in True Romance, which Tarantino wrote and the late Tony Scott directed, the main female character is called Alabama. No doubt a reference to Grier's character in the 1971 flick Women in Cages. In Reservoir Dogs, Mr. White refers to his ex and former partner in crime as Alabama. We see then that Tarantino cribs from almost everywhere, but the script and story come from the writer-director himself. The plot lines are tight and brought to bear with a distinctive voice and message that is arguably and unmistakably Tarantino. As far as visual style goes, the cinematography and choice of music are very striking. Tarantino does not stray very far from the narrative or genre that he is depicting visually. In Inglourious Basterds, for example, tones are darkened, brown and muted, which is very much what you would expect from a movie of that genre. Conversely, in Kill Bill, the lighting is extreme, exaggerated and highly stylized to suit the fantastical scenes being staged. There is a synergy between Tarantino's use of music, cinematography and editing techniques to render his narrative to the screen. His go-to cinematographer has largely been Robert Richardson. They have developed a style together that is both visually striking and highly apt to the storytelling. You will notice this in the action scenes. There is a Scorsese-esque rapid zoom when gunshots are fired, also emulating very much the scenes from Sam Peckinpah's The Wild Bunch shoot-'em-ups, as they were sometimes known. There are also long close-up shots with a slowly moving camera, as characters deliver very important dialogue and exposition. Freeze frames are used to fix in on a character when coming to a crucial moment in the narrative and hammer home an important point. These elements form a very distinctive visual aesthetic in Tarantino's on-screen renderings. The movement of the camera at times is almost like a dance. The blocking is impeccable and the moving camera scenes are aptly choreographed by Richardson and Tarantino. Another crucially important element of Tarantino's storytelling is his choice of music. By his own admission, he has a large record collection, which he often scours to find songs that actually suit the visuals he has filmed. He shares this musical sensibility with Martin Scorsese. Both directors very often use the soundtrack of the day to score their movies, eschewing the need for a more traditional score. A notable exception to this rule has been in his use or reuse of Ennio Morricone's spaghetti western scores when shooting war and western type dramas. Another element, which is not as conspicuous as the score or cinematography, is the editing. This is, however, vital. How the films are cut together, how the chapters are laid out, and how they hold the individual stories together in order to appear fluid and coherent. It's very much down to the skill of Tarantino's longtime editors, Sally Menke and Fred Raskin. The final cut of a typical Tarantino movie contains an average of around 1,300 shots. These are meticulously planned, shot and cut together. No easy task, considering the number of main shots and coverage that must be captured and eventually coalesced into a coherent narrative. If Tarantino is obsessed with any facet of filmmaking, it's genre. He has a handful of favourites, for example, gangster heists, westerns, martial arts movies, and indeed war and horror. These emulations or homages to particular genres all share the meticulous attention to detail and care that Tarantino puts into all of his movies. There are plenty of videos scattered across YouTube which show Tarantino's renderings alongside original classic movie scenes to demonstrate how close the imitations really are. In some cases they could almost have been lifted from the original movie. They are, however, just little vignettes, motifs and brief nods to all-time favourites and fondly remembered moments within popular culture, and serve to embellish Tarantino's mise-en-scène. Two particular movies that spring to mind are Inglourious Basterds and Django Unchained. They have a very thinly veiled veneer of the classic spaghetti western in their style. The way that they are shot, the cinematography, the editing, the choice of music are none too subtle hints at what Tarantino is striving for. Compositions from the soundtracks of original spaghetti westerns and newly composed scores by the late Ennio Morricone give the movies that particular air that they need to fit the genre and Tarantino's vision. For better or worse, Tarantino's name has always been synonymous with stylized violence. There is no story without drama, there is no drama without conflict, and in the same way that poetry is heightened language, I believe that cinema is heightened visuals. One could say an exaggeration of real life. Cinema has the ability to purge. Every film needs its denouement, and between the screenplay's midpoint and resolution, there is a rising tension that must come to a head and deliver the catharsis that the audience requires. For all the violence and bombast, though, and there is plenty, Tarantino manages to infuse a humanity that juxtaposes nicely with the visual carnage. Take, for example, Pulp Fiction. Jules finds a way to show mercy. Butch shows compassion and humanity towards Marcellus, his sworn enemy, and Mia Wallace's overdose shatters her confident and bravado-laced exterior, just as in his dialogue. The characters themselves have an inner monologue within their own identity. They are also two sides of the same coin, and must also grapple with internal conflicts in order to reach their goals. Two examples of how violence is used to deliver catharsis are Inglourious Basterds and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. They both contain alternative fictional endings, a rewriting of history, if you will, to true stories that still haunt the public psyche. Tarantino sometimes argues that the violence is fun, but in my observation again, the violence always escalates with the rising tension after the midpoint to the film's conclusion and resolution. The gallons of fake blood are nothing more than corn syrup and food colouring, but cinema is such a powerful medium that the audience's suspension of disbelief renders the on-screen violence sometimes hard to take. The acting, the music, the Foley sounds come together to make the violence all the more realistic. We could conclude by acknowledging that his renderings are, in some ways, pastiches of Hollywood popular genres with solid scriptwriting and stunningly executed visuals. He owes a lot to classic Hollywood cinema and various subgenres, bringing such deep culture from Hollywood of old to a whole new audience. There are many filmmakers at work who are influenced by Tarantino, but few manage to emulate his signature style. He is unique. In many regards, he is open and forthcoming about his stylistic inclinations and is not in any way pretentious. Tarantino purports to be a lifelong student of films and continues to demonstrate this by example in his movies, even to this day. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like and subscribe. Hit the bell icon for notifications, and I'll see you in the next one.